Welcome to the Careers by Jenn podcast, episode 287. This time on the podcast, Jenn shares an episode of another podcast she was recently featured on to promote a course she's created for Huddle Journeys on the subject of overwhelm. On a week where Jenn is overwhelmed with other things to do, how great is it to be able to repurpose content from elsewhere for this week's episode? I wonder if she put that in her Huddle journey.
Hey, I'm Jenn Swanson, and Careers by Jenn is where I help you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career, and I talk about wellness and success topics too. This podcast is actually ending production after episode 300. However, you can find me over at Careers by Jenn on YouTube, where I will be continuing to share career tips, advice, wellness, and success topics, and much, much more. It's been a 10-year run here on Careers by Jenn on the podcast, and until we are at episode 300, I invite you to continue listening. Go back and listen to the archives, and please enjoy this show. Thank you so much for being here. Have you been feeling stressed lately? Is stuff getting to you? Well, it's no wonder. There's an awful lot going on and not going on these days. I'm Jenn Swanson. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. This show is recorded on the unceded and traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, including the Katzie, the Kwantlen, the Stolo, and the Coquitlam First Nations peoples. Well, today, my friends, I'm going to share something a little bit different with you. A few episodes ago, I shared that I'm taking part in a new project, which is an organization called Huddle, and they've put out an app called Huddle Journeys, and that's Huddol. Huddol Journeys, and the app is available for download in the Android stores, the Google Play stores, and the Apple Store. And Huddle Journeys is an app that allows you to take 7-day transformational journeys right within the app. They're video-based and audio-based, and they're little learning and practice each day, and time for reflection, etc. each day for 7 days, and you access it when and as you wish in the app. And I created a journey in there all about overwhelm. And so what you are going to hear today in this podcast is the podcast episode that I was a guest on with the founder of Huddle, Mark Stolo. And so he is interviewing me about calm and stress. And so before I share this podcast, I want to invite you to a free live class that I will be giving very soon on this topic also. If you're listening to this in actual time when it's released in February of 2021, the class will be held on Tuesday, February 23rd, 2021, at 4 p.m. Pacific or 7 p.m. Eastern. The class is absolutely free. It's called Calm in the Chaos, How to De-Stress and Carry On. And you can register for this by either going to my Instagram or my Twitter accounts at CareersbyJenn, and in the bio there's a link where you can register for it. It's available through Eventbrite. And you can also find it if you download the Huddle Journeys app. So you will find the class there. It's a live class for 1 hour on the topic of stress and keeping calm. And so I hope that you will join me for that class because I would love to answer your questions and be there live with you. All right, so here is the podcast for today, and this episode was titled, Say Yes to Life and No to Feeling Overwhelmed.
This is the Journeys podcast, and I'm your host, Mark Stolo. Today, I'm talking with Jenn Swanson. Jenn has spent more than 25 years educating, encouraging, and empowering others to step out of being stuck and step into success. Jenn guides, inspires, and journeys with individuals who want to move from where they are right now to where they dream of being. How do you say yes to the experience of life without becoming overwhelmed by everything swirling around you? So we're talking today about an experience that I think is pretty universal, the experience of feeling overwhelmed. And it's something that plagues so many people in a lot of different ways. Like, we all have our degrees of what makes us feel overwhelmed. Like, some people have a very high threshold to tolerate a lot of things. Some people have a much lower threshold. What is it in the experience of talking about being overwhelmed that connects back to your own personal experience? Because it's very likely, and from what I've just come to know about you, that this grew out of your own very intimate experience with being overwhelmed.
Yes. Well, I've been a lifelong learner, and I've gone back to school repeatedly for different certifications and training. And it was only 6 years ago that I got a master's degree and started on a new career trajectory. And, with 4 kids and always having multiple jobs and different interests and passions, it has in the past been not that difficult to get into a state of overwhelm. There's so much going on, and I'm also fairly intuitive. So, which means that when things are overwhelming in the world, I feel that a little more than maybe some people. I know some of us who are more sensitive that way feel that weight. And so it's not just what's going on in our own circumstances, but it's sort of the global circumstances as well that can also weigh in on how that plate gets full and how that sense of overwhelm sits, in a person's body. So through lots and lots of changes in career and experience and all of that, I have found times when I have not had a system, I have not had perspective, and I seem to be mired in the muck and feel like I'm drowning. And so I've come over the years to sort of figure out that there are ways to manage it, but it's hard when you're right in the middle to see what's happening.
You talk about the metaphor of the plate. It's almost like a poo-poo platter. It's filled with stuff, but there's a lot of things on that plate, because overwhelm is not just, I have a task list, right? It could be emotional content on that plate. It could be, what do people face on that buffet table of overwhelm beyond just the tasks that they have to do?
Well, it's expectations, and sometimes it's not just the expectations of others. Sometimes it's our own expectations. So if you're a person who has really high expectations for yourself that you fail to meet repeatedly, you can end up feeling that sense of, I can't, the words in the voice in our heads that say things that aren't very nice sometimes to us, that negative self-talk that can assist greatly in adding to that plate of overwhelm. So it's not, as I said before, it's not just your task list. It's the emotions that are happening within you and around you. You might have someone in your life that is in crises all the time, or someone that's very negative that you need to deal with all of the time that adds weight. I know sometimes there are people that I talk to who just sort of suck the life out of me, and there are people who light me up and bring joy. So it depends on who you're hanging out with. That can add to your plate of what you take on, and how good your boundaries are, how much you allow yourself to be affected by somebody else's bad day or bad mood or circumstances. So how much are you allowing yourself to take on personally? and where do you draw that boundary, so that you can help yourself to manage what you already have to do.
Overwhelm seems to me almost like has a spiraling quality about it. Yeah, almost like it seems like the hole seems to get deeper for a lot of people, even though they, that old image of the person digging to try to get out of the hole, and it just seems to keep going down no matter how much they keep digging. Is that what it's like for someone who feels overwhelmed? That old patterns catch up with them and they're kind of using old strategies to try to resolve a problem? Or maybe it's that the problem is not totally well defined. Is that also another pitfall for people who are in this experience of overwhelmed, stressed out, on the verge maybe of burned out or burnt out maybe?
Yeah, it can be hard to gain perspective, and I do talk a lot about that in the journey, is how to gain a little bit of perspective on what's happening. Because sometimes it can, all you see are the sides of the walls of that hole, rather than being above it and seeing everything else that's going on around it. I think people also don't cut themselves a break. Sometimes, it's not unusual to feel overwhelmed. There are so many people in this boat feeling this way, and a lot of us are really good at faking it till we make it. But if you dig down a little deeper, there are probably more people in your world than you realize who are feeling this way. And often we silo ourselves and don't ask for the help when we need it. Don't say no when we really need to say no, because we've got all sorts of fear around what will they think of me, and what if I can't do that, and sometimes the expectations are, I'm speaking for myself here, sometimes my expectations of myself are really ridiculous. It doesn't matter if I get, the Christmas dinner table favors made. Nobody's going to care, right? I mean, that's such a silly example.
Not if they can't eat them. They can't eat them, no one's going to care.
But, do I need to make hand-painted truffles to have at every plate? Whatever it is. It could relate to your work. It could relate, so when is enough for you to still feel good about what you're doing, without, having to be that certain wow factor, that level that you might desire for yourself, and no one else is really going to notice if you don't do it. So it's things like that.
Yeah. There's also this interesting question of, is there ever a point of having enough that will make you feel enough?
Uh-huh.
And I think a lot of people in the state of overwhelm are very much stuck in that trap. If I only just kept doing and pleasing, and or if I just continue avoiding, which is the other overwhelm's ugly cousin, I'll start feeling better. I'll feel better about myself. Do you see that hamster wheel process, this kind of endless cycle of eventually I'll catch up and I'll start feeling good about me?
Right. Well, I actually read a blog post this week by an influencer, Seth Godin. I don't know if you know who he is, but it was called If When. And it was all about if this happens, or when this happens. Maybe it was when this, I can't remember. It was two words put together, and it was, if this happens, then maybe it was if this happens, then I will be X, or if this happens, then this will be wonderful. And we live in this state of lack. We're in this place of lack. We don't have this. If we just had this, it would be so much better, right? And our advertising is all based on that. If you have this car, if you have these sunglasses, or whatever the case may be. But it's going deeper with things like that. It's going a little deeper, like how are you talking to yourself, and what is actually the reality, as opposed to the story we tell about the reality. And so it's getting down and getting quiet and getting into what you're thinking and what you're telling yourself. And one of the things I say in the journey is don't believe everything you think, right? Mm-hmm. Because our brains are constructed to keep us safe, and they don't like change. So we're trying to keep everything in that, safe zone. And so we go back to the old loops, and we go back to the old emotions and the old stories and the old feelings, because that's safe and comfortable, even if it's not constructive.
Yeah. The brain also likes conditional formatting. If X, then Y. You talk about that quote or that concept from Seth Godin. And I think it's but it's important to also understand that conditions are constricting. They narrow our lives. They force us into a very specific. Not only do they force us into very specific ways of being, but they then tend to become very unhelpful patterns.
Right.
Because interestingly enough, as we all discover about life, no matter what we set as the conditions, life has all kinds of interesting ways of breaking down those conditions, like pandemics or other kinds of mini pandemics in our lives that just shake things up entirely. So if you want an A equals B kind of life, you might have to inhabit a different planet or a different parallel universe where those kind of stringent rules can apply all the time. It's a hard way to live under that kind of confinement.
Well, it is, because then you're fighting against what is. And whenever you're fighting against what is, like, oh, I wish it wasn't raining, I mean, that's what a waste of energy, because, hey, it is raining. So you can sit there fighting about it and wasting all sorts of energy and emotions on that, or you can, get out your umbrella or whatever. So it's sort of that kind of thing. It's like, how much energy are we willing to put in what space? Because we only have a finite amount of energy, and we all have the same number of hours in a day. And so how are we going to organize ourselves, and what are we going to allow and what are we not going to allow? And I mean, stuff happens, and sometimes you don't have control over what you have to do in a day because circumstances arise, but there's an awful lot you do have control over. And so that's sort of what I'm trying to get at with the journey, is to help people get control over what it is they can control, externally, but internally as well.
I honestly don't know anyone who does not confront this feeling of being overwhelmed. And sometimes they express it as being stressed out or, again, burnt out. There's all kinds of siblings in that, playing in that similar sandbox. What will people experience on this journey with you? What's important that they understand about how you want to support them in a transformational process of moving from this experience of overwhelm to finding greater space and openness and ease in their lives?
Well, I think one of the main things to think about is it's not a once and done experience. It's a practice. And so I'm hoping to offer ways that people can recognize, first of all, that they're going into that spiral, as you say, or into that state, because it is a state of being. And it's not a state that's never going to come again. We're not guaranteeing to alleviate it forever, but what I'm hoping to do is to help the person taking the journey recognize the signs of it, and then to offer some practices that can be repeated forever to help manage that so that they don't get into that feeling of being completely overcome with it, recognizing, oh, hey, I'm heading towards overwhelm. What can I do? And what things can I drop off that plate? What things can I postpone? What things can I outsource? What things can I manage differently? And what boundaries can I set so that I can take care of myself, which is really, really something we don't do very well sometimes.
As a final invitation for people to come into this journey, what kind of mindset would you recommend that they, or disposition that would you recommend that they assume as they move down this journey with you?
I would say an open mind. It is a process. And while we talk about a practical hands-on system for the practical tasks on the plate, we also talk about that inner work. So some willingness to try things, some patience, and some openness. We'll have some discussion. There's a place for journaling in the app, and my hope is that this is a sort of self-discovery journey that will serve to alleviate some of that overwhelm and sort of to give a sense of, oh, good, I have, ways to cope when this arises again.
Keep on exploring. Jenn invites you to go on a huddle journey on moving beyond the experience of being overwhelmed and taking back your life.